Hello and welcome to our WriteHive panel, Storytelling with an Ensemble Cast. We will be discussing how best to manage a large cast of characters in your story. I am Justine Manzano, and I will be serving as both the moderator of the discussion and a panelist myself. I am the YA author of the Keys and Guardians series, which is YA fantasy, and Never Say Never, which is YA contemporary, both of which feature ensemble casts. And I am a freelance editor and an editor in residence here at WriteHive. Marisa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Marisa Noelle, and I am also a YA author, but I write dystopian, horror, and fantasy, all with mental health aspects to it and mental health representation. And my latest book is The Unraveling of Luna Forrester. It is a dark fantasy, and it also has an ensemble cast, which is why I'm happy to be here today to talk about it.
Matthew, please.
Sure. I'm Matthew Phillion. I am the author of the Indestructibles YA superhero novel series, and a couple of spin-offs, Echo in the Sea, and a fantasy, they call it Jumanji meets D&D series called The Dungeon Crawlers, all ensemble casts. And I'm happy to be here because I wrote my first ever non-ensemble book this past year, and it was terrifying to not be working with an ensemble. So this is a topic I like talking about. So thanks for having me.
Dalto.
Hi, my name is Dalto. I am a YA and NA fantasy author. I have currently published the Empire Saga, which is the most ridiculous ensemble cast I think I've ever could have come up with. I thought I had 1, 2, 3 characters. I think I ended up with 8. And then I'm also an exclusive writer on Wattpad, and currently working on a sequel to Cut to the Bone, which is right now an editor's pick. And again, I think I've tried writing a single point of view book, and I can't. So I'm very happy to be here to talk about my ridiculously large cast of characters.
And York.
Hi, I'm York Campbell. I'm the host of Poetic Earthlings. Poetic Earthlings is a podcast which it has a little bit of an ensemble. It's science fiction, original science fiction anthology. And my goal of Poetic Earthlings is to interweave a story within all of the stories in order to have incredible finales, season finales. So that's me, York Campbell, host of Poetic Earthlings.
It's great. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you all here. I'm going to start with our first question, which is, how do you keep the reader engaged when handling an ensemble cast?
I'll jump in and say I like to use short chapters, so I'm never with one perspective for a long time. I write I should know the term, the literary term, third person limited, I think is the right way to do.
Sounds right.
I think sure. So every chapter is from the sort of focusing on one person's perspective. And they can see the entire scene, but it's from their perspective. And I never stick with any one of them too long. So if an audience member has a particular attachment to a favorite, they're not away from them for very long. And I kind of bounce back and forth. I write relatively short chapters too, so I'm able to bounce between the different characters pretty smoothly. Hopefully they like them all, but if they have favorites that they want to get back to, I don't like to leave them waiting too long. And so I kind of ping pong back and forth so that they get a taste of everybody,
I really like that idea, Matthew, of writing short chapters. And because you're right, sometimes the reader could get a little bit bored, right? If you're staying on one particular character for too long, and it's good to jump back and forth. And so that's a good idea. For me, just briefly, when it comes to my stories, you have to be in it for the long haul, right? Because one story relates to another story within the anthology to tell a bigger picture.
That screws my mind. I love the idea of that. So clever. And it's funny, I'm already seeing a similarity between Matthew and Dalto in the way that I think you jump around your point of view. Whereas my ensemble cast, I actually stay in one point of view for most of the book, but I have 17 characters. So it's a slightly different take on that ensemble cast. I'm not really jumping around so much, but I've got to keep the readers engaged in these 17 characters. So I think what helps me is that because I do have that main point of view, and we are with, it's actually from a guy called Matthew, not Luna, which is on the title of the book. So we're with him most of the time, and we learn about the other characters through his eyes and how they affect him. And so our sympathies are automatically with that main one character, which the reader is rooting for. But through his eyes, you learn who else is important, who's not quite so important. And I think that can build more of your sympathies as you go throughout the book. So that's how I try to balance. And I think, with 17 characters, they're not all going to get equal airtime, and you're not going to care about all of them to that same extent, and that's fine. But they're there to serve a purpose. It was a very purposeful reason why I had that many characters. The book wouldn't have worked without it. And I'm not going to tell you why, because it's a spoiler. So go read it. But it needed it. And it was, as long as Matthew was caring about these characters, that's all the reader needed. And as long as they were sympathetic with why he was caring about them, then that's how I kind of made that balance work in Unraveling Luna.
I'm very similar in the way I use Ensemble Cast to Marisa, because I always have like a main character, point of view character. In the Skeleton Key, I actually have two that I alternate between, but the actual cast of characters, I had a whole mansion full of warriors in the Order of the Key, and I had to keep track of all of them and have them each have their role, because you didn't want anyone that was around that was not doing anything for the story. They each had to have, and the trick, I think, is just making sure that they all have arcs to their story that feed in to the main plot, so that you continue to care about what's happening to them. Not the more minor characters, like there'll always be some more minor characters that just sort of pop in and pop out and aren't as important, but like for the important characters, you want to make sure that they all have an arc that plays into the end, because that way you end up furthering the story. You're not spending any time that's like sort of wasted in the story.
Yeah. And that's how I am. Like when I bring in my characters, it's furthering the story. So I tell my stories very linearly in that. I think I don't have one situation and different points of view looking at the same situation. I use my ensemble cast to continue the story along. So you'll have one point of view that's with one event, and then the next event that's after will be another point of view if needed. Like I don't generally go chapter to chapter point of view change, but I do use it, I guess, somewhat as a plot device. Like I'll determine who I need to bring in, whose eyes we need to see the story through, and that will determine who gets to tell the next part of the story.
I think you're key on that. I remember trying to plot a novel. I think it had 4 different points of view, and I wanted to tell it. I wanted to go in a round robin so that they swapped, in order. And then I was thinking, actually, this is really hard, because how do I make sure the plot and what they're doing fits in that time manner? And it's really complicated. So I think when you read a book that does it well, it's incredible, because it's a difficult skill to master, I think.
I have I had that issue in the Skeleton Key when I was writing it, and I had the 2 points of view. I ended up at first I was going very regimentally back and forth between the 2 characters, and then after a while it was like there were parts where I found I was like making up stuff to happen.
You didn't need to, but you felt like you had to.
Yeah, like it didn't need to be there, but then like I need a Jacqueline chapter now, so I need to fill that out. What am I going to have Jacqueline do? And then I just like started cutting those like filler chapters out, and even though it wasn't like back and forth, it read so much cleaner. So
I've actually found that if I get stuck, because I don't have a regimented, it's sort of like, okay, who's the right person to write this scene from? And I usually think I think I know. And we all hit that chapter. It's like, I can't write this. This is not working. Nothing's working. I'm like, how about I try it from Emily's perspective? And it's like, oh, that's what it needed. I just needed to change the camera angle and see it from her instead of from Billy or something like that. And suddenly the scene, the whole chapter just flows out better.
It's amazing when that happens. Yeah. And this book that I was plotting, I realized it was a duology, and I haven't written it yet. I'm still plotting it, and I realized it's actually not a 4-person point of view book. It's a single POV in first person. But it's book 2 where it has to split into 2 point of views. So I couldn't make those lots of point of views work. So I thought, okay, I'm going back to just one character and go from there. So you just got to feel your way into these things, I think.
What are some tips for keeping your characters distinct and memorable? Because that I feel like that's a really hard part of it, because you have all these different voices, or you probably should have different voices. Like you have to make sure that they're all. Do you have an answer for us, York?
Well, what I do is I like playing around with different voices. Sometimes I even make up voices for my characters. Like I improv by myself, just make things up. And I say, okay, this person is a redneck from the South. I wrote a whole entire book based in the South. Okay, a whole bunch of rednecks. Wow. And then, but I had to make each redneck in the story sound distinct. All right. And so that was some work. There's this one person that stuttered all the time. And so, but it would be a little bit annoying for the reader to see a whole bunch of stutters. So I had to do it in a way that's not annoying, but you know that it's him when you get to that part of the story. You know exactly who you're dealing with. And then when it moves to his love interest, you know exactly who she is. And then the detective, you know exactly how he talks, because he speaks in bigger words. So I think it's the word choices, the vocabulary. For me, just having fun, just playing around with the character sentence structures. So that's what I do to tell who's who in the story.
Yeah, I think that's all really, really great, because I always say that you should be able to tell who's speaking if you take away all the dialogue tags just from how they're speaking and the vocabulary, as you say. Yeah, I think that's great. And for me, I think dialogue is important. Like in Luna, there's a character who's very Irish, and it's very obvious when he's speaking. And that was a really, really easy way. He's also kind of like the menace in the group. So he's always there just to be antagonizing. And you can tell from Matthew's perspective, he's like, oh, here comes Perry again, you know. So you immediately know who this guy is. I use a lot of physical things. There's a character who's got a unicorn tattoo and lots of piercings. I think you can just sum that up in one or two sentences, and it forms a really strong impression in a reader that they will carry with them. So when you are introducing a large cast like that, I think, okay, yeah, she's the one with the unicorn tattoo and the piercings. Maybe mention it once or twice again in the next chapter or two. And then I think those impressions really, really stick. Especially things with disability and different color, different race, different genders, different everything, the way that they identify themselves and the way that they are seen. Anything that's has a little unique or a quirk really stands out. And sometimes that's all you need to do. And I know when I read those books, I think, okay, that's the one that has, the eyes that look like tombstones or something. That just those little words can just stay in your head and create that impression. And then it's done the work for you. So that's the way I try to do it. Hopefully it works.
Actually, I came out of screenwriting, so I was used to writing for different people to speak. And so I don't write anything that can't be read out loud, sort of by design. And so when I'm writing, like, dialogue is huge. Like there are whole chapters where my editor will come back and be like, there's nothing else in there but dialogue for like 3 pages. I'm like, oh no, I did it again. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. The white room. In a white room.
Can you go back in there and put some actions to put in?
No,
I don't want to. But I read to be I want it to be read out loud, and I will read dialogue out loud to myself. And here, and if and you can kind of think, especially if you're writing a series, if you're writing a long-term thing, you get used to what the vibe is for the character. Like, that doesn't feel like so and so, and you kind of know. I've got one character who is I beta tested her voice on other people, like talking like this character, and it was like, can I sustain this for 5 books? Because if I can't sustain it in a conversation, I can't sustain it for 5 books. She ended up being the breakout character because of that distinct quality. But just because we're writing for print doesn't necessarily mean it isn't an it is eventually going to be an auditory audio medium as well. So that helps. I find that helps, at least.
It's interesting what you say about audio, because I've just commissioned Luna to be made into an audiobook, and the guy that I've chosen, he's amazing. He was an actor for 10 years, and he's sending me auditions. So for every character, he'll do 2 or 3 different voices. And that's really made me think about it, not just, in the terms of what they say to distinguish them, but actually how they sound, which you might not necessarily think that much about. But he's like, oh, I think I could do it this way or that way. And I'm like, yeah, that works. That's so him. Well, that's really not that character. And can't wait to hear more of it and see how that comes to life out these 17 characters that are just going to actually start talking. It'll be cool.
I just got through that process with Never Say Never with the audiobook came out. And when I was working with the actress, I didn't realize, I didn't actually have a thing in my head for what they would sound like. I tried to explain at least Bryn, because Bryn's the main character. I was like, okay, this is who Bryn is. And she came back and she was a perfect Bryn. But then she read my Aphrodite character, Val, and I was like, no, try. And I was like trying to put it into words, what I knew what she's supposed to sound like. She's kind of a little bit more ditzy, a little more high pitched, a little more she's Aphrodite. She's the goddess of love. And she's a little bit more in the air, I guess. And trying to explain this to this poor actress that I hired, it was a trip, but she got it. And she tried it a couple of times. I was like, a little more this, a little more that. And then she nailed it. And then she nailed it all the way through. And
I think what you've said is really good directions, actually. So I can totally imagine that. Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah.
One of
the reasons why The Indestructibles isn't an audio yet is it got picked up. It ended up the studio ended up having some trouble, so it fell through. But it was supposed to be turned into an audio play, like a teleplay instead of an audio book. So I got to hear casting options for the different characters that the studio wanted to use, individuals, and I'm like, this is really cool. But I don't know, I know how they sound, but it's hard to take it out of your author head and here's who this person sounds like. And then, but as a film director, they always said see everybody, because you're going to be surprised at who's the best person for it. And sometimes as authors, we're like, oh, that is not how I heard them when I wrote it, but this actually is a great interpretation of this character that I wrote. I can't wait to hear more. Please keep going. So,
which must be exciting with your screen background as well, because the way actors can bring that. I've just started doing a screenwriting course, so I'm having the opposite problem in the sense that I need to dial back on some of the action and description I'm putting into the screenplay, because I'm dumping the book in and then pairing it back. And so it's interesting to do it the other way around. But it's just such an exciting process, I think, to hear all come to life like that.
Especially with an ensemble cast.
Yes.
It's even more fun for our type of thing where it's I get to hear everybody. This is amazing.
How do you make sure that your characters, no one character sort of runs away with the story? Particularly for those that are writing with very different, less for me and Marisa, who write our stories from one point of view, but when you're going through different points of view, how do you make sure no one shows out the main character?
Yeah. And I think that's part of what I said earlier, because usually I try to I have my characters in my head and I try to use their point of views as a plot device, in the sense of I have a story I want to tell. I know how I want to tell it, but who's going to be the best one to tell it? So there's always the main character, and there may be one or two supporting main characters. I don't want to say, they're the main characters themselves, but there are those supporting characters who are worthy enough to receive their own chapters. It's they got that promotion. But again, I think they're supporting roles to that main character still. So I think that in my head is why there will always still be that one main character whose story is we're telling. And then these other characters who, like you said, they've stepped up, they've made their voices want to be heard. And as the author, I'm like, sure, you get your moment. And so they get their chapters and they help the story along. And I think that is part of that balance too, is to remember whose story you're trying to tell or what story you're trying to tell. And it kind of goes back to, having that one main character with all the other side characters versus the multiple points of view, because it definitely can be overwhelming to say, okay, is this person getting enough, screen time? Is this person having too much dialogue with this character? Are they trying to take away this love interest from somebody else that I didn't intend to do in the first place? So it's just really a matter of knowing your own story and how you want to tell it. And I will be the first one to say, I'm rambling, so I apologize, but I'll be the first one to say that I have had a character take over a story that I didn't intend to take over a story, and I let them. So sometimes it may actually work out better, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, I like what you said. For myself, when I write my characters, and if I'm treating it as an ensemble, the way that I did with my thriller book, I always say, if this character's story is not as exciting, then I pause for a moment and I say, how come her story is not as exciting as the main villain? So I have to retool things and figure it out, because I want to give her story a really good story arc. And then the detective in that story, I want to give his storyline. And the villain, which is so convincing, you fall in love with the villain of the story. But I don't want him to overshadow everyone else, because sometimes a villain could overshadow everyone in the story. All right. So I kind of make them in a way, in a sense, kind of compete with each other in a way that, but at the same time, they're trying to be on the same equal footing as all of the other main characters, if that makes sense.
I have a mechanical and then sort of an esoteric way of doing it. I'm not a super, like, I know the whole plotter pantser argument. I leave myself a lot of room to pants, but I generally have like, okay, this to this to this to this, and I'll just have a note like, this is a Titus chapter, this is going to be, a Doc chapter, and I allow myself to be wrong. so but at least when I first plot things out, I'm like, okay, so I'm going to have roughly a very small chapter. So we're talking like 60 to 80 chapters. It's a mess, but like there's lots of opportunity to weave them in there. But before that even happens, I make sure that every character is important to the others in some way. So that there's the weaving back and forth. There's a reason for them to not steal the spotlight from someone else. So each character in the ensemble has a reason to be connected to every one of the in the main, not necessarily the whole cast, but the core ensemble that the story revolves around. I want their interrelationships to be defined to me early on, so I know how to make sure that they all get. It's almost like I want them to be like a really good cast in a TV show, where it's like, I want you to be in the spotlight and share, like the way that a good actor will step back and let the other actor shine. I want to design the characters so that they'll do that naturally. And granted, we're the author, so we are the only person doing that. So it's up to us to be like both actors at the same time. But
I think that's a great way to look at it. I do, yeah. Absolutely.
It's been helpful so far. I think that's why I panicked when I wasn't writing an ensemble cast, because I've been doing that for so long. What happens if you're out putting it on the shoulders of one person instead of the whole cast? I almost like the sharing of responsibility,
right?
and blame if things don't go right. You've got other characters to like, oh, this is your fault,
Like, who can you pass the torch to next, pretty much. And I'm in the same way, in the sense of like, every character has a purpose. Like, I won't bring in ancillary characters, give them names and descriptions if I'm not going to use them either. So if I bring in a character, chances are they're either going to be a great secondary character, the villain, or they're going to end up getting their own chapters. So I do try to make sure that if I'm putting, like you said, if I'm developing a character, I'm going to use that character one way or the other. They aren't just going to be there in the background to be like, oh yeah, remember this random person from chapter 1? Well, they're coming back up in chapter 20. It's like, no, they have to have a purpose. They have to have a meaning, and I have to, as the author, give them that meaning and remember that meaning as I continue through.
I like what you said just briefly. This reminds me of an old TV show I used to watch, and on the show it had all of the main characters, but one character did nothing for the story. And then my wife and I were complaining. We liked the show. We were like, how come Pete, one of the characters, they don't really give him a storyline? He's just hanging out with the main guy. What's going on here? And it got to the point of like, what are the writers in the story thinking? Just cut Pete and bring somebody else in if they're not really going to use them. So yeah, you have to, if you name somebody, or if you think in your heart that somebody is important, then you have to give them something to do. Another show that I'm watching, another character, brilliant actor, but they're not really giving him anything to do. So right now he's on the show. He used to be in charge of the police force on this TV show, and now he's just moping around in the house. Like, what is he doing now? Right now he's probably the best actor in the show, probably, but he serves no purpose. So it's frustrating.
Definitely from the writing, and as a reader, I think there are a couple of things I see when I see a multiple point of view book that's leaning towards one character. I think that either that's the writer's favorite character, or it's the one that they first created and everything else came because of that character. And that's kind of the way that I see that. And I think even when you look at the TV shows, Vampire Diaries or Pretty Little Liars, or all those ensemble casts, it's always slightly geared more towards one person, or at least for a whole season, and I think it's really hard to avoid. I think you need a bit of spreadsheet and maths to make it really balanced. And I like spreadsheets, so it's okay.
It's funny.
To get those arcs equally weighted, I think takes actually a little bit of mathematical work to make sure that they're working in parallel together.
It's funny, I didn't do it intentionally, but I do balance the characters, but I realized at the end of there are 5 kids in the Indestructible series. There's one mentor. He actually is the one that got this spin-off of his own book, which was terrifying. But the 5 core characters, and there's 5 books in the series at the moment, and I realized that each one kind of belongs to one of the 5 characters, and that wasn't by design. It was almost by accident. I'm like, oh, this one's kind of Billy's book in a way, and this one's kind of Emily's book in a way, but they all get equal screen time. But there's a reason why each one is on the cover. Because we actually, when we reissued the series a couple of years back, that wasn't how they originally were. But when all 5 books were out and I was able to weigh in on reissuing the covers, it was like, that's Jane's book. Like, she should be on the cover for this one, and have each character have their moment in the sun. But they're all equal. But having all the cast equally support each other towards the goals, so that they're, even though I keep coming back to the actor thing, but really like, okay, so this is your scene, but we're all going to be here for you. And make sure that this happens, and you're amazing. And sort of, we kind of have to do that for our characters too when we're doing these ensembles, to make sure that nobody gets left behind. I did want to jump in, because when you said there's nobody doing anything in the background, my greatest mistake was putting in a non-speaking animal companion character in one of my books.
Oh, those are the words, because you remember where it is at all times.
Where is he? I didn't mention him in an entire. It's been 3 chapters and I haven't referenced him. It's like, what's this character doing in the background? I'm like, oh no, I gotta go back and fix that.
I have an animal in so I have a dystopian series, which I think complements yours quite well, because it's all about genetic modification. You can take a pill and grow wings or intelligence or whatever. But I do have a dog in that series, but he gets enhanced, so he actually becomes quite important, and he does stuff to help. So, but I know what you mean. I had to go through that whole series and make sure he was present and he was doing stuff to earn his place in that trilogy, not just because the character loved him, So,
yeah. I blame coming out of visual mediums where, like, the animal can just be there in the scene and it's okay. When you're writing a book, you actually have to talk about them a little bit to make sure people remember they're there.
True.
One show that I think does a really good job with ensemble casts is Stranger Things.
Yes.
Yep, I agree.
They make sure that everyone, and a lot of the times they have like different combinations. Like every season they get different combinations of the groups, the core groups of characters, and split the story accordingly. And I just think that it's handled really, really well there, because everyone has their role. And even when it's not in the main part of the story, it's in one of the side stories, and they have like an important place there. So it's a big cast, but it keeps growing. But everybody gets like a decent chunk of the story.
I think the writers of that had a very clear vision going in. And Matthew, you might have seen the treatment Bible of the Stranger Things. It's pages long, with references to movies and Dungeons and Dragons, and the characters are all really well described. There's paragraphs and pages for each character. So I think they went into it very clearly knowing who their characters were before that thing even got filmed, which is why you probably feel that way. So they did a great job. Yeah.
You bring up splitting them up into different groups. And I'd love to throw this out to everybody else, because the hardest scenes for me to write are when everybody's there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Splitting them up into little groups, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, these 2 or 3 people, that's manageable. Like, oh no, everyone's in this scene.
Mm.
I'm gonna give myself an ulcer trying to write this scene. Do you find the same? Do you find the same sort of
Absolutely.
reaction?
Yeah, splitting it up in smaller groups is much better. And I think especially if the story starts, you don't want all of the characters in the room all at once. The reader will say, what's going on here? It would be a little bit too much for them. So I think it's good to introduce each character slowly. So have Janet or have Mohammed, whoever your characters are, and then speak about them, just like Stranger Things a little bit, but more so a newer show called Invasion. It's on Bell. I'm probably the only Earthling that's ever seen the show or probably watched the show. But anyways, they probably have it on just for me. But it's a great show. Yeah, it's an ensemble cast, and they introduce each one. So you have a character in London, you have a character in Japan, you have a character in America. Unfortunately, there's no Canadian characters. I'm Canadian, but they do a really good job bouncing around the world, introducing them slowly into the story, so that you could like or hate the character, and then probably later on, I'm not there yet in the story, probably they'll come together. But if they all came together at once, it would be just way too much.
Sounds like Heroes as well. Did anyone remember that show?
Oh yeah,
They did that really well. Yeah.
Especially the first season.
Yes, actually, I think mostly the first season. I think
Only the first season.
but like just think about Marvel. I mean, they that's how they started their whole the whole thing. They started with Iron Man. They started they developed that character, and they had a movie to develop each character where they went in. And I think where they got a little shaky was when we started throwing in 2 characters in one movie, 3 characters in this movie that you were going to have to get used to and go. And I think that also brings me into my next question, actually, which is, what are the pitfalls of writing an ensemble cast?
Oh, having too much going on would be the first thing. I love a good 2-person or 3-person scene, but if you're writing ensembles, at some point you're going to have the dinner scene, right? Or whatever, we'll call it the giant dinner, whatever. Yeah, or in my thing, it's like the epic battle in the atmosphere. I'm like, oh no, there's so many people. What am I doing? There is that pitfall of having how many bowling pins can you juggle at once, or knives or torches or whatever it is you're juggling at the time, that would be the first pitfall that jumps to mind, is like
It is hard. It's a balancing act, because you want to stay with, I think, a particular character's experience. Say it's a fight scene in a big battle, what they're experiencing, but also out the corner of eye, maybe they're thinking their buddy over there is about to get their head kicked in. How can I get over there, and limit it to that? But then you need to create that general atmosphere of just chaos and bullets whizzing and whatever it is, without going into too specifics. If you start naming so-and-so's doing that, and so-and-so's doing that, and so-and-so's doing that, then it loses all its tension and pace. And you're like, what? Not picturing it all. If you focus on just one of those 2 little characters and give the general feeling of chaos, then I think you can avoid that pitfall potentially. But it is hard. And I think, developing the character who you want the reader to sympathize with, I think if you focus there, then the rest follows in. I think if you're trying to spread yourself too thin, or you haven't introduced each character well enough or deep enough, then you haven't got a chance. So, I love short chapters too, but make sure they're long enough before you move, especially right in the beginning, that we know who that character is before we flip on to the next point of view. So there are ways around it,
I think it kind of goes back to what I was doing. I mean, never introduce a character that you're not going to use in these multiple point of views are plot devices, but don't make them only plot devices. You need to make sure that every voice is developed, every voice has a purpose, and if it's not, it could totally be detrimental to your story. Make sure you don't change a point of view if you don't have to. Like Justine, you mentioned that, earlier, where you felt like you had to go back and forth because that's what you were doing. And then you realize, no. And I've come to that too. I'm like, okay, I've had this character's chapter is for way too long, and I should change to this character's chapter, but they don't really have a part of the story. So do I put them into the story, or do I just let it keep going? And so you kind of like get yourself, like back yourself up against a wall in that point too. So that's really where it can be difficult, and then you bring in one character, but you got to make sure you got to bring them in again. Because I don't think bringing in another point of view just to have one chapter on them is beneficial either. Like you need to make sure that you need to use these characters that you're putting the time into and make sure that they are able to help tell the story further on too.
Yeah, I agree with you. Totally.
And that's why you need to make all of the main characters interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You need to make them sound appealing, captivating. Well, I was writing a really long science fiction novel, and there was just way too many characters. That's the problem sometimes. Just there could just be way too many. And the book was just gigantic, and there's just no way that it's even publishable. I have to rewrite the whole thing and reduce the characters. I mean, the main star, she's incredible. She has powers. She's just amazing. And then you have the villain, she's really cool. And then you have a whole bunch of other people that they could just be included in another book. They don't have to be included in this book. And it just made it just way too big. And I don't plot things out. I probably should have with that book because it was just too confusing. And there was different countries, different nationalities, everything was just a totally brand new world. And it was just, anyways, but just back to the characters. If you have just too many and you can't really distinguish them, then you could probably just work on it for another book and just keep the main ones in focus.
Yeah.
Or combine characters, if you're not distinguishing between two or three, just put that into one, that does all that work. So absolutely.
Yeah. That is one thing that I've had to do with Order. Order was my first book, The Order of the Key, and it was like a big deal for me. I rewrote it like 15, 20 years before it was right. And I had this huge cast of characters, and I kept, every time I rewrote it, I chopped out another one until I realized finally, and this was, up until the end, the last minute, my editor goes, this character, you've changed the story so much, this character, which was a very important character to me, doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And I was like,
that's hard.
Yeah, he does. He does. That thing that I cut out in this round, crap, that's the only thing he does. And I realized he had to go. And there were a couple of characters I was able to move into book 2 and make it make sense, which is the skeleton key. I was able to make that make sense. I was able to move them and have them start in book 2 and have a good meaning. Also, it helped that I killed most of the characters in order.
Needed more characters anyway. Characters to kill, There was that's one of the reasons I have a big cast. I need people to kill.
Yeah. I didn't know we were going to go on this line, but yeah.
It seems bad, but it's true. It's like you do need, just like you need the emotional anchors for your character, you need that, like usually there's like a mentor character, or there's like a close friend, or there's someone in their family that they're like there to protect and things like that. Or, you always have those like really important trope characters that just like sort of have to be there. And then you also have to have characters that you can unfortunately make cannon fodder when you're working in an adventure or like sci-fi type of novel. Like you need them. There are characters, and they have to have the other important thing about that is that if you're going to kill a character, they also need to be super well drawn.
Very
important. Because
you have to make it hurt, otherwise it's pointless.
Yes,
exactly. You don't want it to be a pointless death. You want it to be something that drives your character. You want it to be something that really impacts the story. So even those characters really have to play an important role, even when like, okay, but in chapter whatever.
I have a spreadsheet with all of my, so I have 17. who was getting axed when throughout the book. And I had to keep track of it and what that impact then was on the story for, our main character. And so I had it. And I think, I use a spreadsheet anyway, but this particular book, there were so many characters to keep track of. I needed to know who was doing what in each chapter. And it was a really good way to see it visually. So it was a great way to go. Yeah, it was just like a little staircase going boing, 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 boing. So, off you go.
I feel like another thing that I ran into when working on that, and really an ensemble cast book is probably not the fun thing to do when you're first learning how to write, but I just jumped in. And I feel like I had a lot of trouble with that staggering introductions situation where I had just, the first 3 chapters, you met like a gazillion characters. It was just way too much. And you knew everything about them by the time you left. And it's like, no, how is anyone going to know who any of these people are? I feel like that's a big issue. Pitfall was what I was trying to say. A big pitfall with these types of stories. You have to make sure that when you're introducing them, they have their own moment.
Absolutely.
And like we were saying earlier, and time to develop, even if, because my thought was, well, the main character is going to be confused too, because she's actually meeting all these people too. So that confusion makes it, no.
Does anyone else?
I like your thinking though. That's good.
Does anyone else run into continuity memory issues with your big casts? Like I've actually put out bounties on social media to my readers to find things that I can't find that I wrote. Like I've offered gifts. Like I will send you an autographed copy of this book.
You can remember.
If you can tell me the name of the newspaper I referenced in the second novel. I mean, it's helped, but I'd rather like I should have kept better notes.
I do. I have on my spreadsheet, I have a little tab just for those things, just where I dump that. I just copy and paste it from the manuscript so I can look it up and go, what did I say about that? And off I go. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Especially because most of the times when I don't know if everybody else is like this, but most of the times when I come up with something like that, I'm winging it completely. So I'm like, Bryn goes into a coffee shop. What's the coffee shop's name? It's Caffeine Nation. And that's going to be the town's coffee shop. But like, it always just comes out as I'm typing that part. And then like, I forget about it along the way.
There's some people that create a wiki for their story. And they're very meticulous, super organized. I'm not that type of person. I would like to be that type of person. I think it will just work so much better. You'll save yourself a lot of stress.
Especially with your world building, with science fiction, to keep track of all that. Maybe you should start.
I think I should. Because the characters could build up, the worlds could build up, different countries, different planets, and then different politics for different planets and.
And then when someone's really reading the book and they're confused, how like there's an app for Game of Thrones for all the characters and things like that, they can go to your wiki and go, right, what's going on here? Oh yeah, got it now.
Someone just started a wiki for the books for the Indestructible series, and I'm like, who is this saint that they have to send out? Like, I need to. It was so cool. It was like anybody who contributes to it. It's like you are just taking pressure off of my brain. My editor is actually involved voluntarily just because she loves the characters, and she's like, oh, this looks like fun. I'm like, you have no idea how much this is going to help because I can't remember, especially if you're not constantly involved. Like you take some time off between books to breathe and to think, and the brain does not remember everything that you wrote in that last book. We're just not capable. And maybe some authors are. I'm certainly not able to remember everything I put into a 400-page book. Not
when you've got a big cast, and especially if it is a series. And I remember getting notes in my trilogy in the third book. And I went blah blah blah. Erica did la 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 la, and the note was, "Isn't Erica dead?" It was like, yeah, she died a couple of chapters ago. Oops. Because when you rewrite so much and you change things, you lose that continuity and that consistency in your brain of and things happen. So yeah, you definitely need that. Timelines of spreadsheet to my friends.
I have had people leave on missions and then come back in the room and talk to people like, wait, no, they're somewhere else in the world right now.
It's the person has been standing in the room the whole time thing that gets me more than they actually left. Like, it's almost like, whoa, how long have you been standing there?
Nothing.
Like,
Yeah.
Oh, this poor guy's been standing there waiting his turn to speak for like
with the dog,
with the dog.
Yeah.
Always the dog.
Yeah, that's something to me, like I have a problem with is I have to, like you were saying, the dinner scene, I have a tendency to have these huge scenes where, because everybody has to be on the same page, and if you're investigating something or planning an attack, everyone's got to at some point get in the room together and figure out like the details of what they're going to do. And I also like to make my characters fight a lot because I feel like it also makes them very distinct. Like you get a good picture of who's thinking what when they're all yelling it at each other. Or I agree with this one. I always agree with this one, like that kind of a thing. But I feel like that's something that I have a problem with, where in the middle of the argument, suddenly it'll be like, oh, right, this guy exists. I should probably make him say something now. And then I have to like
character that shouldn't be in that room. If they're not contributing to that conversation, give them something else to do. They've been called away to do something else. That, then I'll try and just think, because I've had, war room meetings like that in some of my books as well. And I kind of think, what is this guy actually thinking? Does he care? Maybe he can go get donuts for the rest of them, or something. So yeah, it's tough. Yeah.
Funny you say that, since there is a scene where someone's just like, I'm just going to go get us snacks. And like,
yeah, that person that goes get the pizza, you don't need them there for like, half an hour.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So when you're picking your point of view, if you are only going, like you were saying, like if you're switching between, like, how do you go about it? Do you pick them? I know some of you said you pick them in advance. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you figure it out when you're writing it. Like, for the most part, like, how do you go about choosing which voice you're following for the majority?
If I've got multiple points of view in a book, it will always be third person for me. I've read some books that it's first person with multiple points of view, and it confuses me because I have to adjust to whose head I'm in each time. Whereas I find third person so much easier to follow with multiple points of view. And you get to mention their name then more, and you can call your chapter headings, in Luna, even though actually most of the book is from Matthew's perspective. I just put who it is right at the beginning of the chapter. Job done. Keeps it simple. So that can be a good indication if you're switching around a lot. But typically, it's instinct that comes to me. Just how I feel the story needs to be told. I mean, I've got things in first person present tense and third person past tense and any combination in between. And for me, it's just the voice that I feel and what I feel the story needs. And then it just comes out. So for me, it's kind of a gut thing.
Yeah, I like what you said. It is a gut thing. You have to rely on your instincts. I wrote a story, second person, which is not very popular to do.
Oh, no.
But it's fun. It's going to be on my season 5 of Poetic Earthlings. And so when you're listening to it, the second person is, you woke up this morning and you did this, you went to the window. It's kind of fun, but I did that not to be as a shock value or anything, but it's just needed for that particular story. It just flowed that way. It has to be that way in order for the character to respond. And so it just worked out naturally.
I think with those second point of view ones, you're obviously drawing the reader into the story much closer than any other form because you are giving the identity of that character. So was that your intention when you went to write that story?
Yeah. It was the intention when I wrote that particular one, because I wanted to pull the reader in, or in this case, the listener in, because and so it's kind of almost like breaking the fourth wall a little bit, especially that particular story. and where I'm saying, okay, you are doing this, you are the main star of this, and you have to run for your life because somebody is trying to get you.
Yeah.
And here's what you need to do. You know, there's
Good.
a cab waiting downstairs. There's a gun in your bag. Follow these instructions carefully. And so that's, you know, so something like that.
No, I think because it makes the reader really think about what would I actually do if I was in that situation, you know. And it's great for all those choose your own adventure books, you know.
Right.
You know, they're famous for that, you know, for instance. So yeah, it's quite exciting, I think, thinking,
yeah,
oh, I'm not going to go down the stairs and pick up the gun. I'm going to go the other way. So
that's right.
Dog. So I think again, it goes very much what you said, York, about and the flow. You want that vibe. My dog has been quiet all day, and now he is right there. He's contributing to our ensemble cast.
You mean to tell me that you have a dog?
I have a dog.
The mystery meowing is on
He's
my end, by the way,
speaking.
too, if anybody hears it.
My
cat has
Telling us his
decided now to
opinion
be
on
very
ensemble
loud.
cast.
They wanted their own parts. They were not going to be written out.
Here's the
There we
dog.
go. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's very much like you go with it. Like I think you go with the vibe. You know, you go with what feels right. And now he shuts up. Sorry. And where was I going with this? Right. How do we do it? How do we
instinct? Yeah.
Yeah, it's an instinct thing, you know, not so much like as us as authors too, but I mean, I think we, you know, get into headspace of our characters as well. And if they still have their story to tell at a certain point, they're going to be pissed at us if we're like, sorry, we're going to switch channel to somebody else's point of view at this moment. The one thing I do it for though, especially in cut to the bone, that one up there, is cliffhangers. So if I'm telling a story in one point of view and say the main character just got stabbed, oh look, we're gonna go talk to the other person now and see what they're doing in the meantime before we reconvene and find out the aftermath of that. And so I actually do kind of enjoy that because even though it's a different point of view, like you got the readers like, what the heck happened to her? Mm-hmm. I gotta know. Yeah. All right, so let me find out what clever. He knows. Yeah. And I like that a little bit too. Sorry, readers.
No, and I love reading those books. It's just, as I was saying about trying to make them all connect. It's hard, but I think it's great to leave those cliffhangers and then, you know, the readers are racing through a couple more points of view to get back to figure. And meanwhile, they're left on cliffhangers. Before you know it, they've read the whole book in a day, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's like every chapter is like you get, because, and I think that's with writing any good book is like, you don't want to write something that's not going to make them want to turn the page. So especially I think when you have an ensemble cast with these different points of view, like we can definitely utilize that to our favor too. I mean, because we can be like, oh, you want to know more about this character? Well, you got to go through these other characters who are going to be relating to this character if you want to find out more about this character. So it's almost like that bait too. Yeah. I'm really cool.
I like to switch perspectives when the character needs to process something. You know, like they need a beat, so let's shift the camera over to somebody else for now because something just happened to traumatize this character. It's funny when we're talking third person versus first person. I realized that when I was a young writer and very full of myself, I wrote in first person a lot, and the more I realized how uninteresting I am as a human being, the more I moved back and back and back and back into third person. And I'm like, I don't want to write about from like in this internal I want to hear about everyone else. And it was like, okay, I've grown a bit as a writer. Like it was that whole, like the young, I'm going to write the great American novel. No, you're not. You're going to tell stories about kids saving the world and you're going to write it from their perspective and make it about someone else. And I realized that I went from, as a young writer, almost writing exclusively first person to wanting to desperately to bounce third person limited to different characters who are wildly different from each other, and that became a much more satisfying writing experience for me. And also I switch character perspectives when I really feel like I'm running out of the energy for that one particular character, and I use it to energize myself. Like, okay, I got to move away from the depressed werewolf for a minute here. Like this is he's making me sad. I got to go over here. Let me go over to this other character. And it helps energize me to change perspectives and change the camera angle to re-energize the scene or re-energize the flow of the book.
Yeah, I've definitely done that. In my first book, 2000 Years, I had the main character go through something pretty traumatic. And so that she could process it. That was really the first time I did take the point of view away from her. It had been like most of the book up to her point, but then that event happened. And so we needed to, like you said, the reader needs to give her time. And then that's when I started bringing in the second point of view in that book. That was actually the real starting point for me. I'm like, okay, she's at this point where she's not going to be somebody who wants to talk. She's not going to want to be someone to tell a story at this point. So what do? Do I do a time lapse? Do we go through these events, or do we try to take the attention off of her just to give her this time and bring in another voice, pretty much? And so that's the way I went. And that's when I realized more, how you can use different point of views to tell your story, that you don't have to be lined up in one character's headspace, the entire time.
And actually, I think the reader probably appreciates that, because as they're coming to terms with whatever they're going through, you don't necessarily want to read pages and pages of introspective dealing.
Exactly.
You want that summarized. So you need to give them a beat, give a different perspective, an insight from another character's point of view that might change the spin on something, then come back when they've semi-processed it and can summarize it for you and move on. I think it works much better anyway. So
I did Order of the Key in first person. Had a great time. Jacqueline was a really fun character. Her point of view was great. And then when I came to book 2, I had separated my 2 leads because there was her and her love interest in the story. Each had their own storyline going on. They separated at the end of the first book. So then I had these 2 characters, and I didn't know, I was thinking point of view. I'm like, well, what do I do? Right? I have this one first person point of view, and I ended up doing, which I questioned for a while. I ended up doing Jacqueline's side in first person and Kip's side in third, which I was like, I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I think it actually, it made sense, because I think because Kip is in his head so much anyway, and that's just the way his character is, where Jacqueline is way more action, and quippy thoughts. It worked for them, I think. But it was a very experimental thing. I could not write Kip in first person. I tried. It felt weird. It felt too much like Jacqueline, and that didn't make sense because they're very different characters. And so I kept rewriting that first chapter, because the first chapter of book 2 is Kip's point of view. I kept rewriting it, and I was like, is it just that I'm rusty with these characters? What's going on? And realized that he had to be in third person, but couldn't shift Jacqueline into third person because I'd been writing her in first person for too long.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. It's interesting. It's really interesting how that just emerges on its own like that, Yeah. And I have similar in my book, actually. Luna, she has the first, middle, and last chapter, and that's first person, whereas the rest of the book is Matthew in third person. And there is a very particular reason for that, which I also can't tell you why. Spoilers. But it works. I think sometimes it just works, and you got to do what your characters tell you to do, and that's when you're doing the right thing, I think. Because
you've now created a character with sort of a life of its own and thoughts of its own, even though it's new, right? Yeah. It's like you're this isn't right for them. Yeah. And having a line show up in your story and going, no, that happened with my editor, where we were writing, when I was working on book 2, we were editing it, and she goes, this doesn't sound right for this person. I said, no, that was totally a line for character D, and realized that I misassigned it. But I was like, yeah, it was when I was editing, I messed up. And she's like, you see how I could tell that, right? That means you're doing the right thing, because I just sort of wrote the wrong blank said. And she was like, that's not them.
Absolutely. I love those moments.
Yeah, isn't it great? Because now you've got a fully formed person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So are there any stories that you feel work better, like any genres that work better when you have an ensemble cast, or any that you would steer clear from with an ensemble cast?
Well, I mean, I think the best stories that works well is a sci-fi story. I wrote a really long one about another planet, and also about Earth, but those ones work good because it's a wide spectrum, right? You're telling a huge story. It's a saga.
Mhm.
And so so an ensemble is good. I probably should have wrote the other science fiction story as that. I think I made the mistake, probably just thinking about it now, centering around this girl, this 17 or 18-year-old girl. She's the main star. But however, the story is probably even bigger than her because there's political forces at play. There's two different planets at play in motion. It's so in that, if I were to rewrite it, it would be an ensemble for the science fiction world. I think that would be a better story for that.
The word you said that I loved was saga, because that could be, it could be sci-fi, it could be fantasy, it could be a family drama, like a generational, like realism. But if you have a story that has that saga component where you're going to need multiple perspectives and time will pass, almost genre irrelevant if there is that sort of bigger picture. Smaller stories can center around one person, or like one person's hero's journey might be great from a solo without an ensemble. But I love that you said the word saga there, because that could be applicable to so many different genres. But it's a feel to itself. Like that is a bigger story, whether it's spanning planets or spanning continents or spanning generations or something.
You need those glimpses into what else is going on. And and I think about the experience I'm going through with this writing a screenplay. So this is for my trilogy, which is first person point of view. It follows the main character is called Silver. But the really fun thing I've learned about writing the screenplay is that I can now show other people's perspective. So when she's got this week's journey through the woods with her father, and she's being chased by hellhounds and the army and all sorts of things, but she's meeting up with her best friend in this hideout. Now I get to show his perspective and what he's going through with his family, whereas I couldn't do that in the book because it was first person. So it's really allowed me to get to know him even more and to give him more agency and see what his relationships outside of her are doing. It's been a phenomenal experience. And I'm learning, I know him so well anyway, but I think he's even going to get his own novella now because I know him even better, and it will be a side to the trilogy. But I think books that work particularly well with ensemble casts are like whodunits and murder mysteries, because you need to have a big enough cast of people to keep shifting that suspicion. 1 minute it's this person, 1 minute it's the next person, and it can be tricky to keep them all right in your head. But I think if it's well written, you kind of need that. And I think unreliable narrators are really great with big casts, because you never quite know who to believe or what information you're going to hear or who's telling the truth. So they work quite well, I think, especially with changing points of view. You never know who's telling you what, is what I would say. Yeah.
I definitely think, fantasy. You think the standard, high fantasy, let's get a group together and go on this journey quest. It doesn't get more ensemble than that, Tolkien, George R.R. Martin. All these huge casts. But even when I write my fantasy, which is what I predominantly write, there's always a journey or something, and you're never going to be completely alone in these journeys either. So whether you get one or two companions, or you come across somewhere where there's 5 different people, I think just fantasy is just great because you are creating these worlds, and what better way to explore them than with different characters from all across them.
Thinking in terms of even stories that do kind of follow the classic hero's journey, aren't they more interesting with an ensemble cast? Like, I'm a big Star Wars fan. Luke's great.
Yeah.
Luke's a lot more fun with Han and Chewie and C-3PO.
And Yoda. Yoda's one of the best.
Pick any fit. you know, sure, it's Frodo's journey, but it's called the Fellowship for a reason. There's
Right.
like, you know, like we love these big casts, and I think I wanted to, when you said the whodunits working well with mysteries, I was going to say the only genre that I truly love, first person singular narrator, are like the old two-fisted mysteries. Like I grew up reading Spencer for Hire books. I'm from Boston, so like these, you know, like if there's ever a detective series to read, it's one like I've been there, you know, like I know that restaurant. But if it's from the detective's perspective, it works really well from like, because you've got that one narrow focus and only one guy knows all the clues. But if you're scattering things across a bigger story, like a whodunit, where like an Agatha Christie style, then you need that cast. Yeah, all those, and then because then you're looking through different windows instead of following one person looking through all the different windows. You're the person looking through those different windows of the story through the different perspectives and piecing it together yourself.
I admire people that write whodunits because I'm not sure I could, you know, trying to get the balance of all those red herrings without giving away too much, but giving away enough breadcrumbs. Oh, that's hard, really hard. Yeah.
I mean, we do it, I think, somewhat with our little plot twists that we throw in.
We probably do. I'm probably not giving myself enough credit, but I think when it's done well, it's you just get to the end and you think, that's so clever, you know?
When it makes sense and you're like, I should have seen that, but I didn't. Yeah. Because when it comes out of nowhere, then it kind of sinks. But when it's that, oh yeah, darn, why didn't I think of that? It's great.
But doesn't it feel like as writers half the time when we have a great plot twist, it's like, whoops. It was like, I guess that plot twist, I guess I did that. I totally did that on purpose. That wasn't me doing that. That totally wasn't improvising in the spot.
No, it's either that, I think, or it's everyone's gonna know this is coming. Like sometimes I feel like that. Like I write a plot twist and I'm like, when my editor reads it and goes, I didn't know. And I'm like, you didn't? That's wonderful news.
Well, that's one of the things I love about my book, Unraveling Luna, is that no one sees it coming unless you read the content warnings, because it does give it away. And people always say you have to read the last chapter to understand this book. And you do, because that's when it all is made worthwhile. But I love that you have to go through that journey to really understand everything. So yeah, it's always lovely to hear when people say, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." You know, I do love that moment. Yeah.
There's the fun part about writing on Ensemble too, where you start getting the "don't you dare" about a certain character, right? Don't you dare take this one away from me. It's the old if so and so dies, we riot.
Yes.
It's like, oh well, there's gonna be a riot. Sorry guys, that's my fault.
Yep.
I keep teasing people with what my new series, which is a 5-book series, is actually a fantasy with mermaids and things like that. And I keep teasing people about the last book, what something's going to happen to the main character. I'm like,
yeah. I killed off my "don't you dare" character in the first book, so and Bee's laughing because she knows, and got people mad at me, but so okay, wrapping up, tell me your final thoughts on Ensemble Cast, and tell me something you know, that you want everybody to know about you and where to find you and all of that.
My final thoughts on Ensemble Cast. I think that, like any type of book, as long as you do it well, it can be extremely rewarding. But, you know, as I think we've chipped in with lots of different ideas and advice, so if you are attempting that kind of book yourself, just keep those things in mind and always think about what works well when you read one, you know, as opposed to what you're trying to write. And I love them. I love, as long as I am, you know, I know who the characters are, then I'm quite happy to read big casts and things like that. And apart from me, I have 6 books out at the moment. So The Unraveling Luna Forrester is one of my dark fantasies. I also do mentoring, young adult mentoring with Write Mentor. So if you fancy working with me, I can do that too. And I'm all over social media, mostly on TikTok these days. So come and say hi. Hey, that's me.
I would say, as new writers, write what makes you happy. And if writing multiple characters in an ensemble is, dive in and don't be afraid to do it. It's we talk a lot about the different skill sets and stuff, as my cat is yelling at me in the background, but I would just say
my dog's still mad at me, so
but I would just say writing ensembles is a lot of fun. Give it a shot if you're afraid to do it. And don't be afraid to mess around with different voices and see what brings you joy as a writer. You can find me online at MatthewPhillion.com. I'm on social media too. I love talking shop about writing. I'm actually Matt Phillion on Twitter and Instagram because I didn't realize I was going to need a Twitter for being an author, and so I got the wrong one. I did just join TikTok and I'm terrified.
It's so much fun. Come play with me on TikTok. It's great.
But find me anywhere. I love talking shop about writing, so feel free to reach out anytime. And I'm in that book right there, and there's a bunch of other stuff. If you look me up, there's about 8 or 10 books now. I don't even know, but I'm out there. Thanks.
Love Ensemble Casts. Don't think I can write a single character cast ever. But just remember, whenever you do use a character and have a character, make sure they have a purpose. Make sure that whenever you bring someone into your ensemble, that they are there for a reason. Otherwise, not only are you going to forget them, your readers are going to forget them. And if you try to bring in too many, people will be like, I'm just confused and just going to forget it. So there's a good balance to it. I love it. I think anyone who wants to do it should try it. And, you might have to kill off a character or two. That's okay. My editor will kill me for that. But you want an ensemble cast? My Empire Saga series is currently up. 4 novels, 4 novellas, because I just can't do one. I'm also still currently writing new stuff on Wattpad. So you can have a lot of free reads and exclusives there. I unfortunately am not on TikTok, but I am all over Twitter. So you can find me on Twitter at mdalto421. My DMs are open. Come say hi, any writing questions, anything at me. I am probably there more than anything else, as Justine knows better than anybody.
Because I am too, as you are too.
Yes, my name is York Campbell, the host of Poetic Earthlings podcast. If you want to hear an ensemble cast done in a different way, then you could listen to my show. Each story is different than the other. And as you're listening, you'll think to yourself, is this an ensemble? There is a golden thread in between different stories. There's also stories that I've written before that's not on the podcast that has an ensemble, but you could try it out. Try to write in that way. Try to write in a way though that gives you energy, that makes you come alive. And I think that's the best advice that I could give any writer. Write something that you absolutely believe in. And also make your world, whatever world you write, even if it's romance, whatever it is. I write science fiction, but whatever you write, make that world lived in. Make it feel at home to the reader. Take your time with it. Make sure that the furniture, everything is all in place. All the decorations are in place. All those little details are in place to penetrate your reader's heart. And so you can catch me on poeticearthlings.com. That's the website. The show is in the 4th season. It's an ensemble cast at times here and there. I'm the main writer. It has sound effects, music, and the 5th season, I'm currently writing that. But you could catch me on Twitter. My handle there is Poetic Earthlings. So at Poetic Earthlings. I'm also on Instagram a little bit as well at Poetic Earthlings, but mostly on Twitter. So thank you.
My final thoughts would be, I feel like you should read in anything that you want to do. If you're looking to learn anything in this craft, you have to read a lot of it. So you have a bunch of people talking about ensemble casts here today. So just to start you off, you could always check out all of their books and give yourself an idea of some interesting and different ways to use an ensemble cast and figure out what you like and what you don't like. And that's the best way to get started, I think, is just to read a lot of what you're looking to learn. And I'm Justine Manzano. You can find my books anywhere books are sold, and you can find me at justinemanzano.com, on Twitter and Instagram as Justine_Manzano, and always in the WriteHive forums, where I have my own section for editors' questions. WriteHive is a nonprofit serving the writing community with resources, events, programming connections, and more. If you want more content, you can check out all the wonderful videos available on the YouTube channel where you found this video. And for now, if you're watching this live during the conference, please join us for the live conference Q&A over at the WriteHive Discord. Thank you for joining us today for this panel. Thank you.